Hello everybody, my name is Ollie and I'm a marketing student at Bournemouth Uni, and in this video I'm going to be looking at the EU referendum that's coming up on the 23rd of June. Now, as you're probably all aware, there's been a lot of debate about the EU referendum and whether Britain should remain as part of the European Union or leave. I've heard a lot of arguments from both sides, with people debating over the reasons that we should stay and the reasons that we should go. But it's left me in a difficult position on how I should vote, and I'm sure for many of you, you may have the same feeling. So I thought it would be handy to look at both campaigns and then, as impartially as possible, look at the facts. So I've gone online and I've loaded up the two main websites, the Vote Leave campaign and the Britain Stronger in Europe campaign. And from there, I'm going to use the facts that are stated on that website to deliver the arguments to you. So to start with, I looked at the Britain Stronger in Europe campaign. So the Remain party have split their campaign into 8 distinct elements. So firstly, with jobs, the in-campaigners highlight that there are over 3 million jobs that can be linked to our trade within the EU. According to the in-campaigners, that's 1 in every 10 within the UK. They argue that a further 790,000 jobs will be created if Britain were to remain within the EU by 2030. Moving on to prices, the in-campaigners state that you're £350 better off a year as a result of being in the EU, and argue that things such as food, drinks, energy bills and so on are kept cheaper. Moving on to the economy, the in-campaigners state that Britain pays £5.7 billion per year as a membership fee to remain within the EU. Whilst that sounds like a high figure, they then argue that £91 billion is brought back into the UK economy as a result of being an EU member. It's also argued that £66 million a day in investment from other EU countries comes into Britain every day. For the risks of leaving the EU, the Britain Stronger In campaign states that it's going to affect jobs. They state that the freedom to travel, work and study abroad would be made more difficult, and also state that funding for things such as farming and science and technology would be dramatically reduced. For Britain's place in the world, the in-campaigners state that our influence as a country would be reduced. Our say on things such as trade, security and climate regulations would also be impacted. The in-campaigners also say that workers' rights would be affected. Things such as holiday leave, health and safety standards, equal rights for women and men, these would all be affected as part of leaving the EU, the campaign argues. And finally, the NHS. Britain Stronger in Europe say the NHS would be hugely affected. So they're the main points that the Britain Stronger in Europe campaign have highlighted as an argument to stay within the European Union. So after looking at those points, I then looked at the Vote Leave campaign. And the Leave campaign argued that a vote to remain within the EU would mean permanently handing over £350 million to Brussels each week, a permanent overruling of UK law, permanent control by the EU of our trade and economy, and permanent control by the EU of security and migration. So one of the first points they talk about is the £350 million a week EU membership. They state this equates to almost £20 billion a year, and argue that this money would be better used if put into something like the NHS and schooling. Vote Leave argue that the EU is becoming too large, letting in too many countries. It states that it originally started with 9, which has now increased to 28. Regarding law and legislation, they argue that the Eurozone has a permanent majority, which means that the UK will always be outvoted. Vote Leave also argue that there's issues with our economy and trade if we were to remain in the EU. They say that only 5% of British businesses actually export to the EU. However, because of various red tape and legislation, it's very difficult for countries to go further afield, for example, China or India. And Vote Leave argue that Britain is a strong country on its own. It states that it's the 5th largest economy in the world, and highlights that our intelligence and security services are some of the best in the world. So finally, Vote Leave sum up their points. They mention that leaving would mean we would stop handing £350 million over to the EU each week. They argue that Britain would be able to take back their legislative powers, state that Britons would have more choice over where money is spent. They argue that businesses would be better off being free from EU rules and regulations, and this would subsequently allow Britain to create trade deals a lot easier. They state that actually diplomatic ties would be strengthened with countries in Europe. So that's it. I've looked at the facts for both main campaigns, and hopefully that's provided you with some information that will help you make your decision for the EU referendum. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you'd like some more information, then I'll put the link to both campaigns in the video, and thanks for watching.